For countless millennia, the Xantari Empire had stood as the unchallenged ruler of the galaxy. Their civilization was a monument to perfection, their technology so advanced that entire star systems bent to their will. No species dared oppose them, for to do so was to invite annihilation from a force that moved like a tidal wave across the cosmos. Their ships were the envy of every race, their weapons carved through the fabric of space itself, and their cities gleamed with the light of stars harnessed and shaped into energy that powered every facet of their existence. No civilization had ever dared rise against them, for they were the pinnacle of creation, and they knew it. Every Xantari leader believed they were destined to rule the galaxy forever. No force could ever touch them. No species could ever hope to challenge them. Their might was unshakable, their empire eternal. But as the ages passed and their borders expanded ever further, the Xantari began to grow complacent. Their empire stretched across countless systems, many of which had surrendered to their power willingly. Their fleets were invincible, and their enemies few. But still there lingered something within the halls of their capital, a whisper of doubt that traveled through their high command. A strange signal had been detected far beyond the Empire's borders, so faint it was almost undetectable. Its origin was unknown, and its meaning unclear. At first it was dismissed as nothing more than cosmic interference, something to be ignored. But the signal persisted, and as it grew stronger, a question began to form in the minds of the Xantari elite. What if this wasn't a random signal? What if it was something more? What if there was something out there beyond the galaxy, something that could pose a threat to them, something they hadn't anticipated? The thought was laughable to the High Council of the Xantari. Their enemies were either assimilated or destroyed. Those who survived were either too weak or too scattered to pose any real threat. They had lived through millennia of peace without challenge, and they had become arrogant in their security. They had long since conquered or destroyed every race they had come across. Their technology was unrivaled. No species had ever dared develop the kind of force needed to contest their power. Still the signal remained, and soon it became a topic of hushed conversation among those who commanded the Xantari fleets. They began to debate its origin and what it might mean. Some suggested it was an ancient message from a long-lost civilization. Others whispered that it was a warning, something dark and foreboding lurking at the galaxy's edge, waiting for the right moment to strike, a force greater than anything the Xantari had encountered. The fleet was dispatched as a precaution, though none truly expected to find anything of significance. They entered the sector where the signal had originated, and for a while they found nothing, just empty space and silence. But as they ventured deeper into the unknown, a sense of unease began to grow among the officers and soldiers aboard the flagship. It was as if they were being watched, as if the very stars themselves were holding their breath. Then they found it a ship unlike any they had ever seen, drifting alone in the vast emptiness of space. Its hull was battered and scarred, but there was something eerily powerful about it, a quiet authority that seemed to call out to them. The Xantari fleet hovered near the wreckage, cautiously studying it from a distance, unsure of what to make of this strange anomaly, a mystery waiting to be uncovered. But deep down they could all feel it, the calm before the storm, and the unsettling truth that something had been watching them all along. The Xantari fleet circled the wrecked ship like vultures, its strange form beckoning them closer. The massive warships, sleek and adorned with the grand symbols of the Xantari Empire, loomed over the derelict vessel, their engines humming with barely contained power. The wreck itself was an enigma. Ancient, its metal scorched and pitted from countless impacts, yet still holding together with an unnerving strength. It drifted lifelessly in the void, a ghost of something long past. But even as the Xantari commanders observed, a gnawing sense of unease tugged at their minds. This was no ordinary wreckage. The ship, though damaged, bore unmistakable signs of design for war. Its hull was unlike anything the Xantari had ever seen, sleek, sharp, and angular in a way that defied the smooth elegance of their own ships. There were no markings they recognized, no symbols or languages that could be traced to any of the civilizations they had encountered. The ship seemed as though it had fallen from the sky, broken but not defeated. Even more curious, the ship emitted faint pulses of energy, almost as if it were alive, as though the wreckage was still calling out to them. The Xantari fleet commander, a seasoned officer known for his wisdom and calm, ordered the recovery teams to board the ship. The silence that followed was suffocating, an unnatural quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the fleet's engines and the occasional blip of scanner readings. The salvage teams, outfitted in the finest Xantari armor, warded the wreck with all the caution of a species that had never known true fear. They moved swiftly, probing the remains for valuable technology, the hidden secrets that might lay within. But as they advanced through the dark corridors of the vessel, they found something unsettling. The ship was not empty. A single chamber held the remnants of a creature, humanoid in form, but unlike anything the Xantari had ever seen. It was ancient, its body shriveled with age, yet it was unmistakably human. The body was hooked into a series of mechanical interfaces, as if the creature had been connected to the ship's very core. The engineers began to dissect the remains, searching for answers, but all they found was a haunting message. The AI embedded within the wreckage began to flicker to life, its systems rusted but functional. A voice emerged from the wreckage, a cold, mechanical voice that spoke words in a language no Xantari had ever encountered. But as they scrambled to translate it, the tone grew clearer. A command was issued, an order that had remained dormant for millennia. "Humanity is not dead," the voice declared, its tone chilling. "We are the last of a dying race, but we shall return. You have disturbed the wrong people." The message sent waves of unease through the entire fleet. A long-forgotten memory resurfaced in the minds of the Xantari. An ancient legend spoken of in whispers, a race of warriors so fierce that they once dominated the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing. But the Xantari had dismissed those stories, thinking them to be myths, tales of an ancient primitive species that had been swept away by time. Yet now, staring at the human corpse, now hearing the echo of the voice from the dead, they realized the legends were not stories. They were a warning. The signal, it seemed, had not been a fluke. It had been a message, a beacon from a species that had once ruled the stars. The humans were coming back, and their power had not died. The Xantari, in their arrogance, had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. As the fleet's officers gathered to discuss their next move, a sense of dread filled the air. They had thought themselves invincible. Now, they were facing a reality that shook their very foundation. The galaxy was no longer just their domain. The humans were coming, and they would not be the passive, extinct race the Xantari had believed. The Xantari fleet sat in eerie silence as the gravity of what they had uncovered settled over them like a heavy cloak. The wrecked human ship, though ancient, had a lingering, almost ominous presence. The AI voice had disappeared into the depths of the ship's systems, but its words echoed in the minds of every officer, every leader aboard the fleet's flagship. Humanity was not extinct. They had been waiting. And now they were coming. The fleet commander, a veteran of countless battles, gathered his highest advisors in the flagship's war room. The room buzzed with tension as every officer present understood that their next actions would decide the future of the Empire. There was no time to waste. The human warship had been dormant for millennia, but it was clear now that it was not alone. The message from the AI was not a threat. It was a declaration. Humanity had not been defeated. It had been preserved. And soon, it would return. "We must strike first," one of the council members suggested, his voice edged with fear. "If they have the ability to build such a ship, they are a threat to our entire existence. We must eradicate them before they gain any power." But another officer, a strategist renowned for his intellect, disagreed. "We cannot rush into battle without understanding the enemy. This ship may be old, its technology broken, but it is still a warship, and we have barely begun to scratch the surface of what it represents. We must study it further, learn its capabilities before acting." The fleet commander, his face unreadable, listened intently to both sides before making a decision. "Prepare a full investigation team," he ordered. We'll send a group of our most skilled engineers to study the wreckage and decipher everything we can. But we will not ignore the possibility that this is the beginning of something far worse than we anticipated." The order was issued, and the fleet moved cautiously forward. But as they approached the wrecked human warship, something strange began to happen. The AI, dormant for so long, began to reactivate in short bursts, its systems flickering with life. The ship's internal lights pulsed faintly in the cold vacuum of space, and the wreckage seemed to come alive in a way that could not be explained by any known technology. Then, with a suddenness that took the Xantari by surprise, the human ship emitted a burst of energy so powerful it rocked the Xantari flagship. For a moment, the entire fleet was thrown into disarray. The shockwave from the energy pulse spread outward, knocking ships off course and scrambling their communications. The Xantari had been caught off guard, but they had little time to recover. The human warship, though broken, was not as dormant as they had believed. It had been waiting, not just for them to discover it, but for something else. HFY's voice crackled to life again, its words sharper and more coherent this time. "This is not the time for hesitation," it said. "We are the children of those who once ruled. You will feel our return in every corner of the galaxy. Prepare yourselves." The voice was colder than before, devoid of any pity, as if centuries of solitude had forged a deadly resolve. The Xantari officers scrambled to assess the situation, trying to understand what had just happened. Had they triggered something? Had they unknowingly reawakened a force they had no hope of containing? The answers came quickly, too quickly. From the wreckage of the human ship, a signal shot out, sending a wave of energy across the stars, far beyond the Xantari fleet's immediate reach. It was a beacon, a call to arms. And then the Xantari saw it, the first of many. From deep within the galaxy's farthest reaches, dark shadows began to appear on their scanners. Ships, not just one, but an entire fleet, a fleet that had been hidden in the dark corners of space. The humans had not been alone. Their warships, each one old but fiercely powerful, had been waiting. And now, they were awakening. The Xantari fleet was no longer the galaxy's undisputed ruler. They had become prey, and the hunt had begun. The Xantari fleet was shaken by the sudden realization that their carefully constructed empire, built on millennia of dominance, was teetering on the brink of collapse. The appearance of the human warship, an artifact of a forgotten age, had shattered their perception of invincibility. But it wasn't the wreck itself that had truly unsettled them. It was the response that followed, the sudden emergence of an entire fleet from the dark corners of the galaxy. These ships were no relics, no ancient remnants. They were as alive as the stars themselves. Ancient but not decrepit, powerful but not untested. The humans had returned. For days, the Xantari fleet drifted in uneasy orbit around the human ship, studying it, hoping to find some flaw in the design, some weakness they could exploit. But the wreckage remained stubbornly silent, and the deeper they delved into the human ship's systems, the more the mysteries mounted. The eye was a complex web of data, layered with encrypted messages that only seemed to taunt them. Even their most advanced tech, their most brilliant engineers, struggled to decode the language of the ship's creators. Then, as if to mock their efforts, the answer came. Not from the wreckage itself, but from the stars. The human fleet, once thought to be lost in time, emerged from hyperspace with terrifying precision. The Xantari sensors picked up the first signs of their approach. Vast ships, shadows against the backdrop of distant suns, appearing in numbers that defied logic. The humans weren't just an isolated threat. They had a presence in the galaxy, hidden but enduring, waiting for the moment to strike. The first wave of human warships hit the outer edges of Xantari space with the fury of a storm. It was a blitz, a sudden attack from multiple fronts, and the Xantari were caught off guard. They had prepared for many things, but not this, not an attack from a force they thought long forgotten. The human ships moved with a brutal efficiency, bypassing Xantari defenses with ease, their weapon systems more advanced than anything the Xantari had ever encountered. Energy pulses sliced through the blackness of space, vaporizing entire battalions of fighters before they could even deploy. The Xantari fleet scrambled to respond, but the humans were already inside their defenses, striking fast and hard. Entire planets were hit in rapid succession, their defense grids overwhelmed by an onslaught of weapons that seemed to come from nowhere. The Xantari scrambled to regroup, but every time they attempted to retaliate, they were struck again. It was a dance of destruction, a brutal, one-sided affair where the humans dictated the rhythm. Aboard the flagship of the Xantari fleet, chaos erupted. Officers shouted commands, the sound of alarms reverberating through the corridors as the flagship's hull shook under repeated blasts. The commander, a veteran of hundreds of campaigns, gripped the armrests of his chair with white-knuckled hands, his mind racing through options. He had never seen anything like this. The Xantari had fought countless battles, but never had they faced an enemy that struck so ruthlessly, so precisely. These humans, what were they? How could they have hidden for so long? And more importantly, why had they waited? "They're not just fighting us," the commander muttered, staring at the holo display in front of him, his mind struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the assault. "They're erasing us." It wasn't just a military conquest. It was something more. A reclamation. The humans were not here to negotiate. They weren't here to be subdued. They were here to wipe the Xantari from the stars, to retake what they believed was once theirs. In the distance, the human fleet continued its relentless advance, their warships cutting through the void like blades through flesh. Each strike was calculated, each move executed with a precision that left the Xantari scrambling to respond. There was no mercy. There was no hesitation. The first wave was only the beginning. The Xantari were facing something they couldn't comprehend, a force that had waited in the shadows for millennia, now unleashed with a fury that threatened to devour them whole. And there was nowhere to run. The Xantari fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, now found itself in full retreat. The human warships, though vastly outnumbered at first, had proven their might with a speed and ferocity that the Xantari could not have anticipated. What had started as a single strike against their outer defenses was quickly escalating into a full-scale war, a war that the Xantari were losing. The galaxy's once dominant empire was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. The human fleet had swept through several star systems, each one falling with shocking speed. The Xantari, used to overwhelming their foes with their superior technology, now found themselves scrambling to keep up. Their defense systems were inadequate, their warships shattered by the brutal, unrelenting power of the humans. It was as though they were fighting an enemy who had studied every aspect of their tactics and knew exactly how to counter them. The flagship of the Xantari fleet, a gargantuan warship that had once been the symbol of their strength, now limped through hyperspace, its hull scared and battered. Commander Zarek, a seasoned veteran with decades of battle experience, stood at the center of the command bridge, his mind reeling. His once proud fleet was being torn apart, and every attempt to rally a counteroffensive had been swiftly neutralized. The humans did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They simply annihilated everything in their path. "We cannot continue like this," Zarek muttered to his officers, his voice a rare crack of uncertainty. "We've underestimated them. Their tactics, their weapons, they're beyond anything we've ever faced." A nearby officer nodded gravely. "Our long-range weapons are ineffective. Their ships can close the distance faster than we can react. And their firepower, our shields can't withstand more than a few hits before they break." Zarek turned to the tactical display, his eyes scanning the shifting coordinates. "We must regroup. There's no choice but to consolidate our forces and fortify our core systems. But we need more time." The officer looked uneasy. "Time is something we don't have. Their fleet grows stronger every day, and they don't seem to tire." As if to punctuate the point, an alarm blared through the bridge. A new fleet of human ships had appeared on the scanners, emerging from hyperspace on the edge of Xantari territory. The human warships were not just a fleet. They were an entire force. The Xantari had assumed that their enemies were a scattered, isolated group, but what they were facing now was something more organized, more methodical, as if the humans had been waiting for this moment for centuries. "All ships, prepare for immediate engagement," Sarek barked, though his voice held a tremor. The time for retreat was gone. The Xantari had no choice now but to face their attackers head-on. The humans wasted no time. The first wave of their ships, sleek and terrifying, opened fire almost immediately. The Xantari fleet retaliated, but their weapons barely scratched the surface of the human warships. The human shields were impervious, their weapons more powerful than anything the Xantari had ever dreamed of. Xantari ships that had once been invincible were shattered in seconds, their crews helpless as the humans carved through their lines. "Deploy the fighters," Sarek ordered desperately. "All ships, form a defensive perimeter." But the Xantari fighters, though numerous, were no match for the swarming human ships. The humans moved with terrifying precision, like predators, picking off one ship after another, using tactics that were both alien and brutally effective. The Xantari, once the masters of space combat, now found themselves outmatched at every turn. As the human fleet pressed forward, the Xantari commander knew the truth. This was no longer a battle for victory. It was a battle for survival. The Xantari had thought themselves the apex of civilization, their empire unchallenged. But now, with every passing moment, that illusion was shattering, and the humans were the ones who held the power. The galaxy had changed, and the Xantari were powerless to stop it. "Fall back to the core systems," Sarek ordered, his voice cold with resignation. "We need to regroup. If we can just hold the line, we may be able to find a way to stop them." But deep inside, he knew it was too late. The humans were no longer just an enemy. They were an unstoppable force, and the galaxy was theirs to reclaim. The retreat to the core systems was supposed to be a desperate yet strategic maneuver, a chance for the Xantari to regroup and marshal their forces. But even as they fled to the center of their empire, the relentless tide of the human fleet continued to press forward. Their advance was like a storm, unforgiving and unstoppable, sweeping away everything in its path. The Xantari once thought themselves untouchable, but now they were cornered, their empire unraveling under the weight of an enemy they had failed to understand. Sarek, still commanding the flagship, stood before the tactical display, his face drawn and pale from the constant strain. The lines of Xantari defense ships and war stations had once been a formidable barrier, but now they were a crumbling wall of desperation. Every attempt to build a defensive perimeter had been shattered within hours of the humans' arrival. The human fleet, though smaller in number, had proven time and again that its strategy and firepower far outmatched anything the Xantari had ever faced. "We cannot hold them off any longer," the fleet's chief strategist, Toller, said gravely, his voice tight with stress. "They've breached our outer defenses. Their forces are already on our doorstep." Sarek clenched his fists, the weight of their defeat pressing on him. "We were supposed to be the galaxy's rulers," he said quietly, almost to himself. "How could we have been so blind? How could we have let this happen?" Toller met his gaze, his expression hardening. "We've underestimated them in every way. We thought them to be a lost race, forgotten. But we were wrong. They've been waiting, evolving, and now we are the ones who are forgotten." The human fleet had arrived at the heart of Xantari space. The core worlds, once bustling with the vibrancy of imperial power, now lay in ruin. Entire populations had been decimated, entire colonies abandoned. The human ships, powerful and relentless, had done more than strike. They had systematically erased Xantari infrastructure, cutting off all communications and resupplying nothing but destruction. Meanwhile, deep within the human fleet, something was happening that the Xantari had failed to grasp. Humanity's return was not just a military conquest, but a cultural reclamation. The warships, though designed for combat, carried within them the essence of the human spirit, fierce, determined, and deeply connected to their lost heritage. The warships' crews were not mere soldiers. They were descendants of a people who had once ruled the stars, and they were reclaiming their birthright. The humans had never been passive conquerors. Their ancestors, long ago, had shaped the galaxy with their own hands. And now, under the command of their brilliant leaders, they were tearing through the remnants of the Xantari Empire, their actions a message. We were here before, and we will be here again. Aboard the flagship of the Xantari fleet, Tarek received a transmission. His eyes widened as he saw the message, a broadcast sent across every frequency in the galaxy. The human fleet had made its intentions clear. The Xantari would be wiped from existence, not as enemies, but as a forgotten empire that had dared to stand in the way of their true heirs. The transmission was brief, but its impact was devastating. The voice of the human leader, a woman with the unshakable authority of someone who had waited for this moment, echoed throughout the bridge. This is the first and final warning. Surrender the galaxy. Your time is over. The message was not a plea. It was not a demand. It was a statement. The Xantari had no choice but to accept the truth. They were not in control anymore. The galaxy had shifted. The humans, with their strength, their resolve, and their patience, had reclaimed what they had once lost. But even in the face of annihilation, the Xantari were not without their pride. They still had fleets, still had powerful weapons at their disposal. Yet the thought of fighting a war they could not win filled them with dread. It was not fear of death that haunted them, but the realization that the humans, those they had dismissed as ancient relics, were their masters now. As Tarek stood in silence, the weight of his empire's destruction upon him, he realized one thing. There was no running from the past. And now, as the human fleet continued its relentless march toward their capital, the Xantari could do nothing but wait for the inevitable. The reclamation was in motion, and nothing would stop it. The Xantari fleet was broken, their power fractured across a galaxy that no longer bowed to their rule. The core systems, once considered the heart of their empire, had become the last bastion of resistance. Zarek stood on the command deck, his mind heavy with the gravity of their situation. Every star that once gleamed with the promise of Xantari dominion now flickered like a distant memory, fading into the darkness. The humans had swept through their defenses with ruthless efficiency, and now they were closing in on the last stronghold of the Xantari. Zarek's voice cracked through the silence of the bridge. Prepare the final defenses. If this is the end, we will make them bleed for every inch they take. The officers, though wary, were resolute. They had lost everything. Their worlds, their fleets, their very identity. But the one thing they still had was their will to fight. It was all they had left. The remaining Xantari forces had gathered at their capital, the once glorious world of Zoras, the crown jewel of their empire. Its massive orbiting stations and planetary shields were their final line of defense. The planet itself, though scared from previous battles, still held the symbols of Xantari pride. But Tarek knew the truth. They were standing on the precipice, and no number of weapons could turn the tide. The humans were coming. The human fleet, seemingly endless, had spread across the sector like a wave, devouring everything in its path. The Xantari's greatest fleets, once invincible, had crumbled under the sheer might of their enemy. Their fighters were outmatched, their warships overwhelmed. Even now, as the final defense plans were laid, the human ships cut through the outermost lines of defense with the precision of a surgeon's knife. As the first wave of human ships approached Zoras, Zarek's thoughts turned to the humans themselves. They had once been a lost species, a whisper in the ancient archives of the galaxy. Now they were the unrelenting force that had come to claim everything that Xantari had built. Zarek couldn't help but respect their resolve. He had underestimated them, like so many others before him. But no more. The humans were no longer a forgotten race. They were the rightful rulers, and the Xantari were the interlopers. Captain, report. Sarek demanded as a new wave of human warships appeared on the horizon of Zaras. The captain's voice, though steady, betrayed the fear they all shared. "Their fleet is advancing, Commander. They've breached our outermost stations. Our last orbital defense grids are failing. We can only hold for a few more hours at best." Sarek's face hardened. He knew what had to be done. The Xantari could not afford to lose, not without a final, desperate attempt at victory. "Prepare all remaining forces for the last stand. Every ship, every fighter, put everything into this. We will die with dignity or not at all." The final wave of Xantari warships surged toward the human fleet, their weapons primed and their shields raised. It was the last push, a final effort to delay the inevitable. But Sarek knew that it would not be enough. The humans had been prepared for this. They had been waiting for this moment. Their fleet moved with a precision that could not be matched. The battle that followed was as brutal as it was swift, with the Xantari fighting with the last remnants of their strength, while the humans struck with terrifying precision. Every shot from the human warships ripped through Xantari defenses like paper. The Xantari flagship, battered but still defiant, fired everything it had left, but it was no use. Then came the final blow, a barrage of energy so powerful it tore through the heart of Zaras's orbital defenses. The shields flickered, faltered, and collapsed, leaving the planet defenseless. The human ships descended on the capital like vultures, their weapons searing through the atmosphere and obliterating what little remained of Xantari might. Sarek, standing at the helm, watched the destruction unfold. The cityscape of Zaras was now engulfed in flames. Entire continents crumbled under the force of the human bombardment. The end was here. "Commander," a voice called out behind him. Sarek turned to see his second-in-command, his expression unreadable. "The capital is lost." Sarek stood motionless, his heart heavy with the weight of his empire's downfall. "Yes," he said quietly, "but let them remember this. Let them remember that we fought until the end." The last of the Xantari forces was being annihilated, their ships exploding in fiery splendor. Sarek turned his gaze toward the stars, his mind not on the battle, but on the future. The humans had reclaimed their place in the galaxy. The Xantari, for all their strength, had become a footnote in history. And with that, the final remnants of the Xantari Empire were silenced. The galaxy was no longer theirs to rule. The humans had returned, and the reign of the Xantari had come to an end. As the last remnants of the Xantari fleet disintegrated into the void, the galaxy held its breath. What had once been an unstoppable empire, stretching across countless stars, was now nothing more than dust and memory. The ruins of their capital, Zaras, smoldered under the weight of destruction, the echoes of an empire's fall resonating across the stars. The human fleet, though battered by the long campaign, had emerged victorious. The war that had started with uncertainty and dread for them now stood as a triumph, an unrelenting reclamation of the galaxy that had once been their own. Commander Sarek, the last surviving leader of the Xantari, was dead, his flagship reduced to nothing but debris, and with him, the dream of an empire that had lasted millennia. But even as the ashes of the old empire settled into the cold expanse of space, the human fleet moved onward. The fleet's leader, Admiral Ariavos, stood at the command deck of the flagship, staring out at the stars, the silence of victory settling over her. The galaxy was theirs now. "It's over," Aria murmured, her voice carrying a mix of relief and resolve. "We've reclaimed our birthright." Her crew, though exhausted from the brutal campaign, shared her sentiment. They had fought not just for survival, but for something more, something that transcended the battlefield. They fought to restore a legacy long forgotten by the galaxy itself. Their ancestors, the ones who had been driven from the stars, had left behind a legacy of greatness. And now, that legacy was theirs to restore. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Aria ordered. "The galaxy is ours, but our work is far from done. We will rebuild, and we will establish a new order. The Xantari may be gone, But there are others who have long profited from their reign. We will bring them to heel. The human fleet, now standing at the precipice of galactic domination, began to move toward the heart of the galaxy. The survivors of the Xanteri, scattered across the remaining sectors, would either surrender or fall to the might of humanity. Aria's orders were clear. There would be no negotiation. The time for mercy had passed. The galaxy had suffered for too long under the iron fist of the Xanteri, and now humanity would take its place at the top of the galactic hierarchy. Meanwhile, as the human warships moved into position, the galaxy's other factions watched with bated breath. The once proud Xanteri Empire had been defeated, but the vacuum left in its wake would not go unfilled. The rise of the humans meant that a new balance of power was coming. The Clyreth Confederacy, the Vriskon clans, and other long-standing empires would have to decide whether to bow before humanity's might or face destruction. On the surface of Zaris, a memorial was being erected. The planet, once the heart of the Xanteri's power, would serve as a symbol of the new era. It would be the first step in the restoration of humanity's lost legacy, the start of a new reign, one founded on strength, unity, and the indomitable will to survive. The humans who had once been cast aside, forgotten, and abandoned by time, had returned not only to reclaim their past, but to carve a future that was theirs alone. And as they stood atop the ashes of the Xanteri Empire, they knew that the galaxy would remember them, not as invaders or conquerors, but as the rightful rulers of the stars. As Aria gazed out at the vast expanse of space, she could almost hear the whispers of her ancestors, calling to her from the depths of time. The human race had returned to claim their place, and this time there would be no turning back. "We are the heirs of the stars," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "And we will rule until the end of time."